Have you ever finished a conversation and realized that somehow you weren't quite the same person afterward? It wasn't loud or dramatic, just a few honest words that stayed with you long after the moment ended. The most powerful conversations don't simply exchange information. They build trust, change opinions, heal relationships, and sometimes even reshape our future. Yet, in a world filled with notifications, endless scrolling, and quick replies, truly meaningful conversations are becoming surprisingly rare. So what makes one conversation unforgettable while another is forgotten within minutes? And how can mastering this everyday skill improve your English and your life? Stay with me, because today's episode might change the way you speak, listen, and connect with people forever.
That is honestly the ultimate question we face today, and I want to welcome you to this deep dive where we're going to decode all of that. We're looking at something that feels entirely natural to us as human beings, but is actually profoundly complex when you peek under the hood, the hidden mechanics of human interaction.
Yeah, and you're going to explore why conversation is, well, it's undeniably a highly learnable skill, right? It's not just a fixed personality trait that you're either born with or you're not.
Absolutely. We're going to unpack the neuroscience behind human connection, which is fascinating, and we'll show you how using advanced language concepts can profoundly alter both your personal and professional life.
I think we really have to start by addressing this massive blind spot most of us have. We tend to treat conversation as, just background noise.
Right, like filler?
Yeah, exactly. Or, well, spot on. We treat it as the filler that just happens while we are busy doing the so-called real things, like commuting to the office, typing up reports, running errands. But when you look at the data and just observe life in general, conversation is the catalyst for almost every major life event.
It really is.
Your career trajectory, your friendships, who you choose to marry, it all literally hinges on how you talk to people.
It is the invisible architecture of our lives. We often mistake the formal structures of society for the things that actually drive outcomes. Like, consider something as structured as a corporate job interview.
Okay, yeah.
On paper, the job interview is a complete illusion. We are conditioned from a very young age to believe it's this rigid, objective evaluation of a resume, right? Like a strict checklist of technical skills and prior experience.
But it's not.
No, if you speak to hiring managers or look at the psychological studies on hiring practices, they will tell you that the final decision rarely comes down to the bullet points on a page.
Okay, I have to push back on that a little bit, though. Surely if you are hiring, say, a structural engineer or a database architect, the technical skills have to be the deciding factor, right? You can't just, charm your way into building a bridge.
That is a very fair distinction, yeah. Let's separate the baseline from the differentiator. The technical skills on your resume, those are the baseline. They are the ticket that gets you through the front door and into the interview chair.
Right, you have to know math to get the interview.
Undeniably. But once you are in that chair, you're usually competing against 3 or 4 other candidates who also have that exact same ticket. They also know how to build the bridge or code the database.
So everyone is basically equal on paper at that point.
Yes. And at that point, the hiring manager's decision shifts from an objective evaluation to a subjective social assessment. The decision is almost always based on conversational flow.
Interesting.
The manager is subconsciously asking themselves, did this person feel easy to talk to? Were they genuinely curious about our team? Did we connect on a human level? You can have 2 candidates with identical qualifications, and the one who understands conversational rhythm, who knows how to listen and respond naturally, will always get the offer.
Because at the end of the day, that hiring manager is a human being who has to sit next to you in a conference room or on Zoom calls for 40 hours a week.
Is it? Well, absolutely.
They are calculating the emotional tax of working with you, right? They want to know they aren't going to be completely miserable doing it.
Undoubtedly, they're evaluating you for tribal fit. And it isn't just in the workplace where this invisible architecture dictates our success. The research on relationship longevity is incredibly revealing here, too.
Oh, this is the part that completely rewired my understanding of romance.
It's paradigm shifting, isn't it? We are sold this romanticized idea that a long, successful marriage is built on having identical passions, shared hobbies, or even perfectly aligned political and social values.
Right. You'd think the secret is loving the same niche indie movies or both being obsessed with marathon running, but it isn't about that at all.
Not at all. The psychological findings are incredibly clear. Lasting relationships are built on the capacity to talk through the mundane realities of life.
The boring stuff.
The incredibly boring stuff. Think about the sheer volume of time two people spend together over 30 or 40 years. The vast majority of that time is not spent on romantic vacations or celebrating major milestones. It is spent navigating boredom, immense financial or familial stress, and just fleeting moments of joy.
Yeah, sitting on the couch on a Tuesday night.
Right. The longevity of a relationship is determined by whether two people can maintain a connection through those incredibly unglamorous decades. It is not about whether you both like hiking. It's about whether you can navigate a disagreement about household chores without shutting down or resorting to contempt.
Which brings up a glaring hole in how we prepare people for the real world. I mean, in school, we are explicitly taught algebra. We spend years learning grammar rules, memorizing historical dates, learning how to structure a persuasive essay with a thesis statement and 3 supporting paragraphs.
We drill it into kids.
We do. But we are handed absolutely no manual for how to sit in silence with another human being. We aren't taught how to make someone feel truly heard when they are grieving. It is like being handed the keys to a car and being expected to drive on a busy highway in the rain just because you've seen cars drive past you. We are just supposed to magically figure out the most complex social dynamics on our own.
That driving analogy captures the absurdity perfectly. We assume that because we have vocal cords and a basic vocabulary, we automatically know how to converse. But exchanging phonetic sounds is not the same as building trust.
It's totally different.
And this staggering lack of foundational education has severe real-world consequences, even in areas we assume are purely objective and math-driven. Take the economics of tone, for example.
The economics of tone.
Yeah, if you analyze high-stakes business deals, corporate mergers, or even a personal salary negotiation, the final outcome is frequently dictated more by the conversational tone and the mutual feeling of being heard than the actual numbers on a spreadsheet.
Wait, I need to understand the mechanics of that. How can the mood in a room overrule $1 million difference on a spreadsheet? Business is supposed to be ruthless and calculated.
Because human beings are not algorithms, even when they're wearing expensive suits.
That's a good point.
Negotiation experts emphasize that when two people feel genuinely heard and respected by each other, their brain chemistry literally shifts. They step out of a rigid, defensive, transactional mindset. They begin to view the other party as a collaborator rather than an adversary.
So they stop fighting over the pie and start trying to bake a bigger one.
Specifically that, yes. When that shift happens, they find creative, mutually beneficial solutions that just weren't visible when they were fighting over a static number. Conversely, if the tone is adversarial, condescending, or dismissive, the deal will often fall apart purely out of spite.
Even if the math is good.
Even if the math objectively makes sense for both sides. Trust is built in real time, through the pauses, the unexpected shared laughter, and the pacing of the talk.
It makes a lot more sense when you look at how we evolved, I guess. We are trying to do modern, complex things like negotiating software contracts or analyzing stock portfolios with brains that were forged in a very different environment.
Our neurobiology is ancient. Conversation is humanity's oldest technology. It predates the written word by tens of thousands of years.
Wow, yeah.
Long before printing presses, telegraphs, or smartphones, our ancestors were gathered around campfires. They were using conversation to pass down vital survival knowledge, to warn each other of predators, and to form the complex social bonds that allowed our relatively weak physical species to survive and dominate the planet. Our brains were shaped by countless generations of talking to one another face to face.
So if our brains are literally wired for this, if conversation is in our evolutionary DNA, why do so many of us feel terribly awkward doing it? Because I am definitely someone who has left a dinner party, got into my car, and immediately started replaying a conversation in my head, absolutely cringing at a joke I made that didn't land. If it's natural, why is it so hard?
You are certainly not alone in the post-party replay loop. I do it too. It feels awkward because modern conversation has been stripped of many of its traditional safety nets, and we are interacting with a much wider variety of people than our ancestors ever did.
That makes sense.
But the awkwardness is fixable because, as we established, the mechanics of a good conversation are learned behaviors. However, the struggle usually begins not with the words coming out of our mouths, but with what happens when the other person is speaking. The fundamental breakdown occurs in how we listen.
Oh, man. Most people do not listen. They really don't. They merely wait for their turn to speak. I catch myself doing this all the time. Someone is telling a story, And I am nodding along, but my internal monologue is furiously drafting my next sentence so I sound smart the second they take a breath.
It is the most common conversational hurdle we face. We view listening as a passive waiting room.
A waiting room, yeah.
Let's look at a very specific everyday scenario to illustrate this trap specifically, the trap of problem solving. Imagine a woman named Sarah.
Okay.
She has just had a brutal workday. A major project she was managing fell apart. Her boss was short with her in front of her team, and she's completely emotionally exhausted. So she calls her close friend Maya to vent. Maya, who loves Sarah and is very well-meaning, immediately jumps into action. Sarah barely finishes her sentence before Maya says, "Have you tried talking to HR? Maybe you should ask to be transferred to a different project team. Or, you know what, you should just update your resume and leave."
And Sarah instantly feels 10 times worse, even though Maya is technically offering logical solutions.
So she's profoundly more alone in that moment. To understand why, we have to look at the subconscious message being sent. Maya's immediate leap into advice-giving communicates a message she absolutely never intended to send.
What's the message?
The subtext of her quick fix is, "I do not have the time, the patience, or the emotional bandwidth to sit here with your pain. Let's wrap up these negative emotions, solve the logistics, and move on to something lighter."
Oh, wow. It is like handing an umbrella to someone who just wants to complain about the rain.
That is a perfect analogy.
Sometimes they don't want to be kept dry. They aren't looking for a meteorological solution. They just want you to stand in the rain with them for a minute, get a little wet yourself, and say, yeah, this weather is absolutely awful.
That is a highly accurate way to visualize it. If you hand them the umbrella and rush them inside, you're essentially telling them that their reaction to the rain is an inconvenience to you. The alternative to this fixing reflex is active listening.
And active listening is hard.
It is not passive. It involves fully concentrating on the speaker, not just letting their sound waves wash over your eardrums while you plan your grocery list. It involves reflecting back what you have heard and processing their emotional state. Maya could have said, "So it sounds like you felt completely blindsided and disrespected by your manager today." And critically, active listening involves forcefully resisting the urge to redirect the focus to a solution.
Active listening isn't just verbal, though. There is a huge physical component to this. You can't be actively listening if your body language says you are somewhere else.
Physical presence is the foundation of the interaction. Sustained eye contact, an open posture that faces the speaker, and perhaps the most vital component in our modern era, not checking your phone.
The phone is the worst offender.
The sting of the distracted while someone glances down at a glowing screen is severe. It sends a devastating, undeniable message to the speaker. It says, "You and your current distress are not quite important enough for my full attention right now. You rank below whatever notification just vibrated in my pocket."
I think everyone listening to this deep dive has been on the receiving end of that distracted and it hurts. It instantly makes you want to stop talking and just retreat.
Absolutely.
But there's another listening failure that I have to confess I'm deeply guilty of, and it usually happens when my phone is away and I am fully engaged. It's conversational topping.
Ah, yes. The topping failure is a fascinating psychological quirk because it almost always stems from a genuine desire to connect. It rarely comes from a place of malice.
Right. If someone tells me they had a rough flight with terrible turbulence and they were terrified, my immediate instinct is to jump in and say, "Oh my gosh, I know how you feel. One time my flight was delayed for 11 hours. We hit a massive storm and I almost missed my sister's wedding."
You're trying to relate.
Right. In my head, I am building a bridge of shared experience. But how do we recognize when our attempt to relate is actually just hijacking the spotlight? And is it always bad? Because I've read that in some neurodivergent communities, sharing a parallel story is actually the primary way of demonstrating empathy. It's a way of saying, I recognize your pain because I have felt a version of it.
That is a brilliant nuance to bring up. The intent behind topping is often deeply empathetic, and in certain contexts or communities, it is entirely welcomed as a form of bonding. The problem arises in the mismatch of expectations and the broader social reception. On the surface, sharing your story feels to you like you are validating their experience. But practically, mechanically, it yanks the microphone away from the person who was originally trying to process their own feelings. They were seeking a sounding board, and suddenly they find themselves assigned the role of audience member for your story.
Ouch. Yeah, that makes sense.
A skilled listener recognizes that impulse to share their own parallel story, acknowledges the empathy driving it internally, and then actively chooses to hold it back. Instead of topping the story, they yield the floor. They ask a follow-up question about the rough flight. They practice what psychologists call listening beneath the words.
Listening beneath the words. So paying attention to the tone, the gaps in the sentence, the body language. What does that actually look like in practice?
It is the ability to catch the gap between what is literally said and how it is physically communicated. Let's say a friend says, "I'm fine. Work has just been a lot lately."
The classic, "I'm fine."
Right. If you only listen to the words, you might say, "Oh, glad you're fine," and move on. But if their shoulders are slumped, their gaze is fixed on the floor, and their voice is entirely devoid of its usual energy, they are not fine.
The words say one thing, the body says another.
And the skilled listener hears the crushing exhaustion underneath the word fine. They don't ignore it, but they also don't aggressively interrogate it. They gently make space for it. They might lower their own tone to match the mood and say, "You sound much more tired than usual. Do you want to talk about it? Or do you just want to distract ourselves tonight?" You give them the agency to open the door.
You're reading the emotional data they're broadcasting. Okay, so if we can train ourselves to actually listen, to stand in the rain without offering an umbrella, to suppress the urge, to hijack their stories, to hear the exhaustion beneath the word fine, we still face a major hurdle.
Which is?
We have to figure out how to start the conversation in the first place, especially with people we don't know well. And that requires us to explore a concept that almost everyone claims to absolutely despise, which is small talk.
It has a terrible reputation.
It does. It seems completely counterintuitive, but the gateway to profound depth is almost always shallow.
Small talk is incredibly and quite unfairly despised in modern culture. You hear people proudly declare at parties, "I hate small talk. I don't do it. I only like deep, meaningful conversations."
They wear it like a badge of honor.
They do, as if it implies some sort of intellectual superiority. But small talk is not the opposite of deep conversation. It is the vital, necessary doorway to it. In sociological terms, it functions as a social handshake.
A social handshake. I love that framing. So when I'm at a neighborhood barbecue and I ask a guy standing by the grill, "How do you know the host?" I'm not actually dying to know the logistical timeline of their friendship. I don't care what year they met.
Not at all. The literal answer is irrelevant. Subconsciously, through this ritual, you are running a fundamental safety check. You are signaling to the other person, "I am friendly. I am not a physical or social threat. I respect the established norms of interaction, and I am open to engaging with you in a reciprocal manner."
It's all about establishing a baseline rhythm.
Yes, only after that neurological groundwork is laid, and both parties subconsciously agree that the interaction is safe, can the conversation naturally progress into more interesting or vulnerable territory.
Because if you skip the small talk, it is basically an ambush. Imagine walking up to a total stranger at a corporate networking event, skipping the hello and the "what company are you with," and just aggressively asking, "So, what is the deepest childhood trauma that still dictates your daily decision-making?"
They would spill their drink and call security.
Exactly. You cannot just demand vulnerability. You have to earn the right to the deep stuff.
You absolutely have to earn it. Depth needs to be earned through a gradual, mutual buildup of trust. The specific mechanism for building that trust, for moving from the shallow end of the pool to the deep end, is what behavioral researchers call conversational threading.
Conversational threading. Let's dig into that.
This is the art of moving a chat from surface-level pleasantries towards something substantial without jarring the other person or making them feel interrogated.
I've tried this before, but sometimes I feel like I'm just firing random questions at someone. Where's the line between threading and just being nosy? How does it actually work in practice?
The line lies in following their cues rather than forcing your own agenda. Let's use a very common scenario, the grandmother example. Imagine a coworker mentions, entirely in passing, that they were out of town over the weekend visiting their grandmother.
Okay.
A flat, unskilled response, which isn't rude, just a dead end, would be, "Oh, nice. Where does she live?"
Right. Which keeps it safely on the surface. Now you are locked into a conversation about geography, real estate prices, and how bad the traffic was on the interstate.
That is the trap. But a skilled pivot, a proper conversational thread, picks up on the human element rather than the logistical element. You might ask, "Oh, that's wonderful. What's she like?"
Oh, that's good.
That incredibly subtle shift instantly changes the topic from geography to inner emotional worlds. You are inviting a story, a memory, or a reflection on a relationship. If the coworker wants to keep it brief, they can say, "She's sweet," and that's fine. But more often than not, you've opened a door for them to share a funny anecdote or talk about their family dynamics.
It is a tiny adjustment in vocabulary, but it alters the entire trajectory of the interaction. You're giving them a runway to take off.
Exactly.
But what happens if my mind goes completely blank? You're at a conference, you don't know anyone, you've established they aren't a threat, but you just can't find a natural thread to pull.
That is a very real anxiety, and it is where the FORD method proves its worth.
FORD.
Yes, it is a mental map utilized heavily by professional networkers, diplomats, and journalists for those exact moments when the brain freezes. FORD is an acronym that stands for Family, Occupation, Recreation, and Dreams.
Family, occupation, recreation, dreams. Got it.
It provides you with 4 broad, generally safe, low-stakes territories that almost anyone is willing to talk about. Now, as you mentioned earlier with your fear of being nosy, it is critical to understand that FORD is not an interrogation checklist. You don't rapid-fire ask about their kids, their job, their golf game, and their life goals.
Right. That would be terrifying. How is your mother? What do you do? Do you play tennis? What are your deepest dreams?
It is merely a reliable set of starting points to prevent a silence from turning heavy and awkward.
That is incredibly practical because it gives your panicked brain a filing cabinet to pull from. But I imagine this framework has to change depending on where you are in the world, because the rules of small talk are certainly not a universal constant. If you ask about someone's family right away in certain countries, you might offend them.
Cultural context is everything, and recognizing these nuances is vital to avoid misplaced judgment. The function of the social handshake is universal, but the words used to achieve it vary wildly. In the UK, for instance, discussing the weather is practically a national pastime. It isn't because the British are uniquely fascinated by meteorology. It is a complex, highly codified social ritual used to gauge mood and establish politeness without invading privacy.
So it's safe.
Yes. By contrast, in the American South, a simple trip to a local corner shop can easily turn into a 15-minute, highly personal chat about the cashier's family health, the neighborhood gossip, and weekend plans.
Yeah, you get their whole life story while buying a soda.
Precisely. But if you travel to parts of Northern Europe or operate in highly specific business-centric environments like certain tech hubs, small talk is minimized. Efficiency and directness are prized as a sign of respect for the other person's time.
So if you don't know the local rules, you might think people in London are agonizingly boring, people in Georgia are overly nosy, and people in Stockholm are incredibly cold and rude, when in reality, every single one of them is just politely following their own cultural script.
Accurately stated. You have to learn the local frequency. And regardless of the specific cultural script being used, small talk consistently functions as what psychologists call an emotional weather report.
An emotional weather report. I like that.
When you walk into the office and ask a colleague, "How's it going today?" You aren't really asking for a play-by-play of their morning. But a flat, evasive fine delivered while staring at a monitor gives you entirely different emotional data than a bright, engaged response where they spin their chair around to face you.
You are constantly gathering data on their mental state to calibrate how you should interact with them for the rest of the day.
Absolutely.
Okay, this is where things transition from psychology to biology. When we successfully thread this small talk, when we read that emotional weather report correctly and gently guide the conversation into deeper territory, something highly measurable, completely physical, and honestly mind-blowing happens inside the human brain.
This is perhaps the most fascinating aspect of all human interaction. We think of conversations as abstract things, just ideas floating in the air between two people. But great conversations are not just social events. They are profound chemical and neurological events.
Which is wild to think about.
It really is. When neuroscientists use functional MRI scanners to study the brains of two people engaged in a genuinely connected, deeply engaged conversation, they observe a phenomenon known as neural coupling.
Neural coupling, break that down for us. What does that actually look like if I am looking at a brain scan?
If you look at the scan side by side, you will see that the listener's brain activity actually begins to synchronize with the speaker's brain activity.
Wait, literally syncing up.
Literally syncing up. The blood flow and electrical impulses in the listener's brain start mirroring the exact patterns of the person who is talking, often with just a fraction of a second delay. On a literal neurological level, the listener's brain is momentarily simulating the speaker's thoughts, emotions, and perspective in real time. The barrier between the two minds becomes incredibly porous.
It is like having two separate, highly tuned musical instruments in the same room. Someone plucks the string on one instrument, and the corresponding string on the other instrument across the room starts vibrating in perfect harmony just from the sound waves.
That acoustic analogy is neurobiologically sound.
It is quite literally a neurological miracle where you are temporarily experiencing another person's consciousness.
It is a form of resonance. And alongside this synchronized electrical activity, there is a profound chemical cocktail being released into the bloodstream of both individuals. Positive, trust-building conversation triggers a significant release of oxytocin, which is often referred to as the bonding hormone.
Right, I've heard of oxytocin.
It fosters feelings of closeness, empathy, and social safety. Furthermore, if the conversational threading leads to a shared laugh, your brain releases endorphins, which are the body's natural painkillers and feel-good chemicals.
Which completely explains why shared humor is the bedrock of so many long-term friendships.
It definitely is.
It isn't just that you happen to think the same obscure movies are funny, it's that you are mutually, consistently dosing each other with endorphins over years. You become chemically bonded to their presence.
You are creating a shared, physical moment of togetherness that the brain fundamentally registers as safety and tribal belonging. It is an addiction to connection. However, just as we can use words to trigger positive chemical cascades, we must also examine the opposite mechanism.
Uh-oh. The dark side of the brain chemicals.
Yes. We have to look at what happens when words trigger a threat, leading to an amygdala hijack.
The amygdala hijack. The name alone sounds violent. This has to be the biological reason why arguments with my partner sometimes feel completely, utterly impossible to resolve, no matter how logical I think I'm being.
That is the exact mechanism at work. The amygdala is an almond-shaped cluster of nuclei deep within the brain, primarily responsible for processing fear and threat detection. When a conversation turns tense, heavily judgmental, or aggressively confrontational, your brain's threat detection system is activated. Your body doesn't distinguish between a physical threat, like a predator, and a social threat, like being humiliated or attacked by your partner. You enter a state of fight or flight.
So my brain thinks a tiger is in the room.
Essentially, yes. When the amygdala takes over, it essentially hoards the brain's resources. The blood flow literally shifts away from the prefrontal cortex, the part of your brain responsible for nuanced thinking, empathy, logic, and active listening.
The smart part of the brain shuts down.
Exactly. Your higher cognitive functions are essentially put on pause. You are far too busy defending your psychological survival to hear a word the other person is saying.
So that is why arguments just go in endless, exhausting circles, because both people are essentially operating with severely compromised brain function. We aren't having a debate of ideas. We are just two threatened animals barking at each other from across the kitchen.
That is a very stark but entirely accurate way to describe it.
Yeah.
That is why pushing harder with your flawless logic or your meticulously constructed arguments during a heated fight never works.
I always try to use logic, and it always fails.
It fails because the other person literally lacks the blood flow to their prefrontal cortex to process your logic. The verbal remedy for an amygdala hijack is not a better argument. It is de-escalation.
De-escalation. How do you do that?
You have to signal safety to the animal part of their brain. And saying something in a calm tone like, I don't want this to turn into an argument, I love you, and I just want to understand your side of this, sends a profound signal of safety.
It's like putting your hands up to show you don't have a weapon.
Yes. It powers down the threat detection system, lowers the heart rate, and allows the higher functioning parts of the brain to slowly come back online.
It's incredible and slightly terrifying that we hold the power to drastically alter someone else's brain chemistry, their blood flow, and our heart rate, just by choosing our words carefully. And it doesn't just affect our temporary mood. The data suggests this stuff actually impacts our long-term structural brain health, right?
It does, in highly significant ways. Extensive longitudinal research on aging populations demonstrates that maintaining rich, varied social connections and regularly engaging in deep, nuanced conversations can actually slow cognitive decline.
Wow, so it's protective against aging.
Meaningful conversation forces the brain to recall memories, parse complex emotional cues, and formulate rapid responses. It is one of the most effective, holistic forms of cognitive exercise available, far superior to isolated brain training apps.
But there's a catch, right?
There is. Here is the critical caveat that modern society needs to grapple with. There is a documented face-to-face asymmetry.
A face-to-face asymmetry, meaning having an hour-long in-person conversation does something different to the brain than texting for an hour?
Significantly different. Face-to-face contact produces a vastly stronger, more complex chemical and neurological bond than text-based communication.
Why is that?
When you are face-to-face, the brain is constantly processing an enormous bandwidth of data, the subtle shifts in tone of voice, the micro-expressions flashing across the face, the posture, the pheromones, the shared physical environment. All of this adds a layer of neurological richness that firing off a text message simply cannot replicate.
The text message is just flat data.
Exactly. The neural coupling is much weaker via text. This biological reality explains the profound modern paradox we see today.
Yeah.
Millions of people report feeling deeply, chronically lonely, despite being constantly in touch via their devices all day long.
They are getting the ping of information, but they are starved of the chemical nourishment of presence.
Spot on.
Because our brains are so incredibly malleable to these rich face-to-face exchanges, the right words, delivered in the right way, holding the right space at the right time, can permanently alter our life's trajectory. Which brings us to perhaps the most moving part of this deep dive, the anatomy of conversations that permanently rearrange our internal lives.
The conversations that change us. What is endlessly fascinating here when we look at sociological studies of life-changing moments is that these profound, path-altering exchanges don't always happen with our closest friends, our spouses, or our family members. In a surprising number of cases, they happen with complete strangers.
We have to talk about the story of David and the hospice nurse from our research stack because it perfectly encapsulates this phenomenon.
It is a profound illustration. David was a man in his early 30s feeling completely trapped. He was stuck in a corporate career he actively disliked, but it paid well, it was secure, and he couldn't logically justify abandoning to pursue his actual passion, which was teaching.
Right, the golden handcuffs.
Yes. He was paralyzed by the fear of losing status. So he goes to a friend's dinner party and ends up seated next to a total stranger, a woman in her late 60s who worked as a hospice nurse.
Okay.
Over dessert, they start chatting. He casually mentions his career frustration, and she says something to him very gently, born from her years of experience with people at the end of their lives.
What did she say?
She said, "You'd be amazed how many people right at the very end say the exact same thing to me. They wish they'd taken the leap they were too scared to take when they had the time."
Wow. It just hits you right in the chest.
It did for him.
Yeah.
Now, David didn't dramatically stand up, throw his napkin down, and quit his job the very next morning. But that single, unvarnished sentence planted itself deep in his subconscious.
It resonated.
It stayed with him for months, slowly altering his internal risk calculus, dismantling his excuses, until he finally did resign and change his career path.
The question I have is, why does a stranger have that kind of overwhelming power? If David's best friend or his mother had said that exact same sentence to him, he likely would have brushed it off. He would have gotten defensive and said, "You don't understand my financial situation."
Because a stranger doesn't view us through the fixed, heavily distorted lens of our relationship history.
The baggage.
Right. When a parent or a close friend gives us advice, even excellent advice, it arrives loaded with decades of baggage. It carries the weight of past arguments, unspoken expectations, and the rigid roles we have assigned to each other. We immediately activate our defenses.
But with a stranger, none of that is there.
A stranger cuts through all of that defensive architecture. They offer a plain truth without the weight of history. It is a clean slate, and because there is no emotional baggage to fight against, the truth can land cleanly.
It's the ultimate clean slate. And beyond strangers, there is another type of conversation that fundamentally changes us, and it occurs in moments of intense vulnerability and grief. In our culture, we feel this immense, crushing pressure to say the right thing when someone we love is hurting. We try to force a silver lining on their pain. We say things like, "Well, everything happens for a reason," or "At least you have your health."
Which is almost universally perceived as deeply unhelpful, if not outright insulting, by the person in pain.
It feels terrible.
When someone is in the throes of deep grief or crisis, attempting to fast forward them to the bright side is a form of dismissal. It is another version of handing them the umbrella to keep them dry. Admitting your own helplessness in the face of their tragedy is profoundly more comforting.
So what do you say instead of looking for the silver lining?
Simply looking at them and saying, "I am so sorry, I honestly don't know what to say, but I am here and I am not leaving." That removes the pressure to fix the unfixable. It offers genuine, grounded presence instead of a hollow platitude.
Sometimes the most powerful conversation is just two people sitting in the dark, acknowledging that it is dark.
That is beautifully put.
And then there's the art of repair. The conversations that resurrect a relationship that has been dead for years. There's this deeply moving story of Priya and her estranged father.
Yes, the dynamic between Priya and her father is a masterclass in relational repair. They hadn't meaningfully spoken for over a decade.
10 years, wow.
The rift started after a bitter, highly escalated argument about her decision to drop out of a prestigious graduate program to pursue the arts. For 10 years, they only exchanged superficial holiday greetings and polite nods at family gatherings. The relationship was frozen.
So what broke the ice?
An unexpected family funeral in a rural town forced them to share a rental car for a 6-hour drive. For the first 2 hours, it was agonizing silence. But somewhere around hour 3, staring straight ahead at the highway, her father quietly said, "I was scared for you, Priya. I was never disappointed in you. I just didn't want you to struggle, and I never knew how to say that without sounding angry."
Oh my gosh.
That one vulnerable sentence dismantled 10 years of immense distance.
What stands out to me so strongly about Priya's story is the physical environment. It was a long car ride. I like to call this the trap environment.
The trap environment. I like that term.
It could be a car, a quiet walk in the woods where you are miles from a trailhead, or a sterile waiting room at a hospital. When escape routes are physically removed, when you can't just casually walk away into another room or conveniently pretend you need to check an email sustained, unbroken presence is forced upon you.
The trap environment forces the issue. When distraction and physical avoidance are rendered impossible, the silence eventually becomes heavier than the fear of confrontation. We are finally compelled to endure the discomfort of honesty. The car is particularly effective because you are sitting side by side looking at the road rather than making intense eye contact, which actually lowers the cognitive load and reduces the amygdala's threat response.
But the stark reality is, in today's world, track environments barely exist anymore, because no matter where we are, we carry an instant escape route in our pockets at all times. Which leads us to a critical junction in this deep dive, the digital dilemma. How has modern technology simultaneously expanded our global reach, giving us the ability to talk to anyone, anywhere, while fundamentally fracturing our capacity for conversational depth?
Technology has undeniably given us a miracle of global connectivity. But in exchange, it has introduced the profound and constant ambiguity of texting.
The ambiguity is so stressful.
When we communicate purely through text, we strip away the tone of voice, the pacing, the pauses, and the facial expressions. We strip away the entirety of the emotional weather report we discussed earlier. Doing so creates entirely new categories of miscommunication that our brains are not equipped to handle. Consider the terrifying, universally understood ambiguity of receiving a text from a partner or a boss that simply says "fine" with a period at the end.
Oh, the dreaded period. It is a psychological weapon. If I get a text that says "fine" with a period, my brain goes into overdrive.
Right, because what does it mean?
It could mean, yes, that scheduling change works for me. Or it could mean, I am seething with a deep volcanic anger. I am evaluating our entire relationship and you should be very afraid. Without the tone of voice, you have absolutely no idea which one it is.
And because you have no idea, your brain is forced to guess. Because human beings have a deeply ingrained evolutionary negativity bias, we are wired to assume the rustle in the bushes is a predator, not the wind. We almost always default to the worst-case scenario. That ambiguity breeds chronic anxiety.
It really does.
But beyond the anxiety of texting, the digital dilemma brings us to the pervasive issue of phubbing.
Phone plus snubbing.
Phubbing.
Correct. It is a slightly silly word for a deeply destructive behavior. Rigorous sociological studies show that the mere act of glancing at a phone during a conversation, even for just 2 or 3 seconds to check a notification, measurably degrades the sense of connection for both parties.
Just a 2-second glance. Just 2 seconds. The speaker immediately feels dismissed. And as we discussed with neural coupling, the listener's brain synchronization is instantly broken. It is a micro-rejection that, compounded over years, erodes the foundation of a relationship.
And it isn't just about the damage done in the moments we are actually trying to talk to each other. It is about what our digital habits are doing to our underlying attention spans when we aren't talking. Short-form scrolling, the endless feed of 15-second videos, it fundamentally rewires our dopamine receptors. It makes us incredibly restless.
It creates a constant craving for novelty.
Exactly. When you are neurologically accustomed to a new hit of dopamine, a new joke, or a new visual stimulus every 10 seconds, sitting through a slow, meandering 10-minute story from a friend starts to feel agonizingly unnatural. You feel a physical itch to look away.
It requires a type of sustained patience that we're simply losing the habit of exercising. The muscle is atrophying, and this is causing highly noticeable generational shifts in how we interact.
Like phone anxiety.
Yes. We now see younger generations experiencing genuine clinical anxiety around traditional phone calls. Now, it is crucial to state clearly here that this isn't about one generation being morally better or worse at communicating.
Right, it's not a judgment.
It is strictly a matter of conditioning and which conversational muscles are being exercised. If your primary mode of communication is highly curated, editable, asynchronous text, then the raw, unedited spontaneity of a live voice call feels like an unpredictable threat. You can't control it, so it induces anxiety.
We need digital minimalism, clearly. We need structural fixes, like protecting meals and the first and last hours of the day from screens entirely. But if we know all of these massive hurdles, the digital distractions eroding our attention, the amygdala hijacks ruining our arguments, the terrible ambiguity of a period in a text message, what specific actionable tools can we adopt tomorrow to fight back?
That is the perfect question.
How do we become master conversationalists? Because as we said at the start, this is a learnable set of deliberate techniques, not just some innate magical extroversion that you are either born with or you aren't.
Let's break down the toolkit of a master conversationalist. These are 8 deliberate practices you can implement immediately.
Okay, lay them out for us.
The first tool is utilizing curious follow-ups. Instead of asking generic dead-end questions like, what do you do for work? A master conversationalist shifts to the specific and the personal. They ask, what made you get into that field in the first place? Or what's the most surprising part of your job?
It instantly changes the question from a dry data gathering exercise into an invitation for a narrative. It proves you're actually interested in their journey, not just their job title.
Definitely. It threads the needle. The second tool is comfort with silence. And this is often the hardest one for highly verbal people.
Oh, this is mine. I am terrible at this.
When a pause happens in a conversation, our immediate instinct is to rush in and rescue the silence because it feels socially awkward. We panic. But a skilled conversationalist understands that a heavy silence often means the other person is internally processing something deeply honest or vulnerable.
So if you interrupt it, you ruin it.
If you jump in with a joke or a pivot to fill the void, you kill the insight before it is even born.
I really, truly struggle with that one. I always want to be the conversational lifeguard. I want to jump in and save the moment from being awkward. It takes incredible discipline to just sit there, let the quiet hang in the air, and let it do its work. It feels like holding your breath.
It does take practice, but the payoff is immense. Tool number 3 is the deliberate use of open-ended questions. It is a simple mechanical switch.
Give us an example.
Swapping out a closed question like, did you have a good weekend? Which elicits a binary yes or no, for an open question like, what was the absolute best part of your weekend? The open question forces a narrative response. It requires them to reflect and select a story.
I like that. Tool number 4, holding back the match. This goes back to what we discussed at length earlier about topping a story, right?
Yes, it is the conscious discipline of knowing when not to relate a story back to your own life immediately. It's the restraint required to let the other person own the spotlight for a minute, even if you have the perfect parallel anecdote.
Just let them have the floor. Okay, what's tool 5?
Tool number 5 is calibrated vulnerability. If you want a conversation to deepen past the small talk, you cannot just fire open-ended questions at the other person like an investigative journalist. You have to grant them permission to be honest by offering a piece of yourself first.
So you got to open up a little bit.
You admit a minor fear, a recent failure, or an insecurity of your own. When you show calibrated vulnerability, not oversharing your deepest trauma, just a relatable struggle, it signals that the environment is safe for them to lower their drawbridge as well.
Tool number 6 is reading the room. This is the crucial social attunement required to know if the current moment calls for a joke to lighten the heavy mood, some highly practical advice, or just a sympathetic ear and an umbrella.
Exactly. You can't use the same conversational approach for a grieving friend as you would for a networking event. You have to adjust your frequency.
And tool number 7.
Tool number 7 is follow through. This is incredibly rare and profoundly impactful. It is the act of asking about a previously mentioned event days or weeks later.
Like checking in.
Yes, sending a message that says, hey, how did that presentation go on Tuesday that you were so nervous about? It demonstrates unequivocally that you weren't just passively listening in the moment. You internalized their experience and carried it with you. It makes people feel deeply valued.
I love when people do that for me. And finally, the unspoken 8th skill, which might be the most important, yielding space. Simply asking the 3 words, "What about you?"
It seems so simple.
It is, but I think we get so caught up in trying to sound smart or trying to prove our worth that we forget a basic truth warmth. And making room for others always, always trumps being quick-witted or impressive. You absolutely do not have to be the funniest or smartest person in the room. You just have to be the most inviting.
I agree completely. And if an individual can diligently practice and master this toolkit, the next logical step is to scale it up. How do we move beyond individual interactions to heal our broader environments? How do we cultivate a conversational culture?
A culture where this is the norm.
Right. How do we structurally build environments where deep connection, rather than superficial exchange, is the default setting?
Let's start with families. The sociological data on the family unit is just amazing when it comes to this.
It truly is. Family researchers and child psychologists consistently point to the compounding effect of thousands of screen-free family dinners over the years.
It doesn't have to be a big philosophical debate every night.
No, not at all. We often think bonding requires big, expensive vacations. But it isn't about having a heavy, profound debate every single night at the dinner table. It is the steady, daily accumulation of low-stakes, uninterrupted physical presence. It is learning the rhythms of each other's days. That consistent baseline builds an incredibly resilient family structure that can weather the inevitable crises.
And what about the workplace? Because frankly, most corporate offices feel like vast conversation deserts these days. Everyone has noise-canceling headphones on, communicating entirely through Slack messages.
The culture of a workplace is almost entirely dictated by its leadership. Managers hold the key here. Data on employee retention shows that managers who prioritize genuine check-ins, for example, starting a one-on-one meeting by asking, "How are you doing, actually?" and creating the space to hear the real answer, secure significantly more loyalty and productivity from their teams than managers who offer higher baseline salaries but lack any emotional attunement.
People want to feel seen.
People fundamentally want to feel seen as human beings, not just as cogs producing output.
And zooming out even further to our communities at large, we are undeniably living in an era of deep, often hostile social and political division. People are sorting themselves into echo chambers.
We are experiencing a crisis of division. And looking impartially at the research across various sociological studies regarding conflict resolution, sustained, respectful conversation remains the absolute most proven method to soften prejudice and break down rigid assumptions about the other.
So not arguing on Twitter.
Far from it. When people who hold radically opposing viewpoints are placed in an environment where they are guided to engage in long-form, respectful dialogue, focusing on personal narratives rather than political talking points, the caricature of the enemy tends to dissolve. This isn't about endorsing any particular side of a debate. It is about recognizing the universal humanizing effect of genuine conversation.
It is much harder to hate someone when you know the story of their life, which perfectly explains the rising counter-trend we are seeing right now. There's a movement of conversation dinners where strangers gather specifically to talk deeply without phones. And look at the absolute explosion of long-form podcast shows where people just sit and talk for 3 hours. Clearly, people are starving for unhurried, nuanced exchange in a world of sound bites. Which makes me wonder something about schools.
What's that?
Why aren't these conversational skills, how to disagree respectfully without triggering an amygdala hijack, how to sit with silence, how to actively listen formally taught in our educational curriculums?
It raises a vital and somewhat uncomfortable question about what we truly value in our education systems. Historically, schools prioritize easily measurable metrics, standardized test scores, memorization, mathematical proficiency. Soft skills like emotional regulation and conversational nuance are difficult to quantify on a spreadsheet, so they are sidelined.
But they matter so much.
They do. However, early tests in progressive educational models show that when students are formally taught these skills, it vastly improves their lives. It reduces bullying, deepens their friendships, and surprisingly, by improving their emotional regulation, it actually elevates their academic performance across the board.
Because to thrive in literally any of these environments, whether it is a family dinner, a corporate boardroom, or a divided society, one needs the right vocabulary to articulate these complex internal nuances.
Which brings us to a major practical goal for our listeners today, tying these deep psychological and sociological concepts directly to improving English fluency. By mastering specific C1 level vocabulary, you aren't just learning big words, you give yourself the precise framework required to actually engage in these deep conversations in English.
Let's slow down and unpack some of these key C1 terms we've used throughout the deep dive. Take the word resonate. I love this word.
It is a powerful term. When we say a story resonates with us, we aren't just saying we heard the audio. We are saying it had a meaningful, lingering emotional impact. As we discussed with neural coupling, it struck a chord within our own experience. It vibrated on our frequency.
It hit you on a deeper level. And what about the crucial importance of nuanced phrasing? We talked earlier about the amygdala hijack and how arguments go wrong. Avoiding that hijack requires a nuanced approach. What does that mean in practice?
A nuanced approach means recognizing and expressing subtle distinctions, shades of meaning, and complexities. It is the opposite of making black and white, aggressive, sweeping statements like, "You always do this." Nuance is what keeps the prefrontal cortex engaged and the threat detector calm.
For sure. Speaking of that threat detector, we must understand the word defensiveness. Recognizing defensiveness in a conversation, whether it is in yourself or the other person, is the key to unlocking the trap.
Defensiveness is that protective, resistant attitude that flares up when we feel criticized. If you can label it in the moment, they're reacting with defensiveness right now, they feel unsafe, it allows you to de-escalate rather than attack.
That's a superpower.
It is. And the antidote to that defensiveness is achieving emotional attunement. Attunement is the ultimate goal of the master conversationalist. It is the state of being deeply sensitive, aware, and responsive to someone else's emotional state in real time.
It's tuning your instrument to theirs. And beyond single vocabulary words, we can also use native-level English idioms to capture these complex social dynamics perfectly. We talked about the story of David and the hospice nurse. The exact idiom she used that changed his life was taking the leap.
Taking the leap is a vivid idiom that means making a bold, risky, or significant decision, often with an uncertain outcome. It perfectly encapsulates the courage required to fundamentally change your life's trajectory, like quitting a secure job.
And we noted how strangers, because they don't have our historical baggage, can cut through our defenses. They bypass the confusion and the history to get straight to the raw truth of the matter.
We also use the phrase go in circles to describe what happens when arguments happen under a threat response. Going in circles means having a prolonged discussion that makes no real progress and repeatedly covers the exact same ground without resolution.
We've all been there.
Oh, absolutely. And finally, we discuss the vital skill of reading the room, which is correctly sensing the unspoken mood, tension, or atmosphere of a social situation before you decide to speak.
I want to emphasize to everyone listening, by learning these specific words and idioms, you aren't just memorizing a vocabulary list to pass a C1 English exam. You are actively rewiring how your brain perceives social interactions. Language shapes thought. By learning the word attunement, you are giving your brain a new category, a new lens for understanding and practicing human behavior.
It equips you with the tools to not just passively participate in the English-speaking world, but to profoundly, genuinely connect within it. As we bring this deep dive to a close, I want to leave you with a final, provocative reflection drawn from the mechanics we've explored today. I want you to pause and think of the last conversation that genuinely deeply stayed with you. What made it different? Was it the silence, the vulnerability, and more importantly, is there someone in your life who desperately deserves that same kind of unhurried, attuned conversation from you soon, before too much more time quietly slips by?
I absolutely love that thought. It is a powerful reminder that we hold the ability to change someone's day or even their life just by listening properly. So here is your concrete challenge for today. Right after this deep dive ends, reach out to someone. Don't just send a text with an ambiguous period and a thumbs up emoji. Call them, or better yet, sit down with them face to face and have an actual dedicated conversation. Use the tools we talked about. Be genuinely curious. Hold the silence even when it feels heavy and see what happens. Thank you so much for joining us on this journey into the hidden mechanics of connection. Please remember to like, share, and subscribe to this YouTube channel.